All right, so I actually just posted that crash course discussion just to kind of recap on the topic of what leads us into the first formed government. And I'm going to be showing you two other clips from different people on some of the subjects that we're talking about. But, I mean, so first of all, I'm going to be only highlighting one aspect from George Washington's legacy as president. And, so I want to make this very clear that, yes, we could talk about many different things. And I'm mainly wanting to kind of touch on a theme, right? And so first of all, to say that George Washington was very shrewd at kind of dodging partisan politics, but yet he was not wishy-washy by any means. I think it's fair to say that looking at his actions, he was definitely a Federalist. But he, didn't make such overt claims. And I would like to pose this. I would say that George Washington and Thomas Jefferson were exact opposites in many ways. Well, not exact opposite. They were men with large estates. They were, big farms. Yes, they had slaves. But, George Washington approached things differently. For one, George Washington, I think, really believed in much more of a strong federal government than would make many people now in the Republican Party, for example, that are not for that role, uncomfortable. And at the same time, I'd argue that Thomas Jefferson really did. I think that as we were discussing these views that were taking place, these debates about the power of the state, George Washington and Hamilton and company had views that were not the same as the other founding fathers. And so this is the other thing that I kind of want to dispel. The founding fathers, when people talk ill of them or talk well of them, they sometimes talk about them collectively as if they represented this one thing. The founding fathers were sometimes a dysfunctional family, if you want to use the word father. And they were really opposed, sometimes violently opposed to each other's views on what they thought the United States should look like. And so I think that it's more productive to analyze, when people talk about what would the founding fathers do, I always say, well, which one? Right? If we're going to go back to the intent of the founding fathers, we have to ask which one. That's my argument that I make. Now, George Washington really found a kind of challenge that wasn't unlike Shays' Rebellion, and it was the Whiskey Rebellion while he was president. And it really was a test of what power this government and the presidency would have. Now, it's kind of interesting that the government was facing a certain amount of challenges that wasn't ironically like the British government had after the 7 Years' Wars in relations to the colony. So remember, the 7 Years' War, the French Indian War, as it was known here, cost the British a lot of money, and they felt that it would be it was their right to impose taxes on the colonists to create, compensation. And the reaction to the Stamp Act and all these other kind of things led to the Revolution. Now, this new U.S. government found itself basically, how are you going to get money for this government? What about the issue of taxes? And for many of the Americans, especially out on the frontiers, they were being looked to pay for the taxes that were needed now after the Revolution. And many of them were feeling the same kind of resentment, like, whoa, taxing us? Okay, all right. and only taxing certain members of us, only taxing those of us selling whiskey, calling it a luxury tax, when those of us out in the boondocks, this is almost like bread and butter, man. Sometimes I was watching a documentary, and many of these were also those, those hillbillies, those descendants of the Scots Irish, would make payments with whiskey, even to their pastors. Okay, there was a kind of whiskey culture, if you will, and they were at odds with this idea that they had to take on this particular tax. So they refused. Now, this documentary clip, well, not documentary, it's a little lecture clip that someone put together. It's well done, and I want to have you watch it. But they kind of play down the reaction. They call it peaceful protests. I mean, one of the first tax collectors came in to collect liquor was actually tarred and feathered. That kind of upset Washington and the government, to say the least. One story goes that a tax collector even had their nose put to a grinder and ground off. That's extreme. Okay, that's not a little thing. These were those fierce, independent, kind of frontiersmen that didn't like the idea of the government imposing itself on them. And so this is kind of this like American tradition, and as well as the tension, right? Is, we celebrate the legacy of having our government, but the bottom line is a lot of that kind of frontier spirit is just, it's cool. Help protect us against foreigners that attack us, but stay out of my life. Okay, right? And George Washington's approach to this was ultimately to show a massive disproportional show of force and lead an army larger than he commanded during the Revolution to squash the rebellion, and it basically withered away. You'll see this, and so I think that for many now they'd be shocked at this rule. But as partly talked about in the clip, I think the message that Washington was sending was, look, we, the U.S. government, we do need to have taxes. By the way, we will not see Shays' Rebellion twice happen. And by the way, we can really implement the law into reality. And he's the only standing president that ever led a military in action while being president. And he did it to squash resistance to paying taxes. Okay, I want you to think about that. That's kind of mind-blowing to me. When you think about the way we conceive of the issue of even the demonization of having taxes taken away and what that meant. But in a sense, George Washington, I think it's fair, in my opinion, this was, for better or for worse, a way of the government saying, we are real. We're not just a concept on paper. Okay? That's my take on what his message that he was sending. But I'm going to have you watch a clip on that. We'll do a little more discussion about the differences of some of these political trends, and we'll cover the French, the war with France that you never hear about briefly, and then that'll be the end of this section. So we're covering a lot, but very important information in this section. So, okay, I'll end right here.